Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venture Fuel Visionaries podcast. I'm your host, Fred Schonberg. On today's show, we have Paolo Narciso. Paolo is a technologist, an author, social entrepreneur, and a builder. He has over 35 years of experience in leading companies across all different sectors. And today, we're going to talk about the work he is doing with Stand Together Ventures Lab, which supports entrepreneurs tackling society's biggest challenges, how they're reimagining healthcare, as well as his book, From Founder to CEO, a transformative guide for entrepreneurs navigating the crucial transition from founding to leading. Please join me in welcoming Paolo Narciso to the show. Paolo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me again, Fred. I really appreciate it. This is such an honor, and I'm humbled to be here.
I was teasing and joking before we started that I think you're the second guest ever to make a second appearance on the podcast. So many of our listeners would remember our first conversation back when you were Vice President of New Products and Product Program Development and Business Optimization at ARP Foundation. And we talked a lot about your partnership with Blooming Health, which has gone on to amazing things. But that's still one of our most listened to episodes. So I was like, we got to get you back, especially when I saw a recent post you made about your book. So one of the things I think resonated that first time was this idea of disruptive technologies solving complex social challenges. And I know that's core to your heart and who you are and your mission in life. So can you tell us a little bit about your view on that at a high level, and then what brought you to STVL and what you're doing there?
Yeah. So, Stand Together Ventures Lab is an innovation hub that brings together entrepreneurs, innovators, other change makers. And as you said, the goal is to solve some of society's biggest challenges. It's part of Stand Together's larger community, which is all about empowering people to help others improve their lives. And Stand Together Ventures Lab is focused on finding and nurturing the early stage companies that are tackling these key issues in areas like healthcare, education, criminal justice reform, and also in economic opportunity. What's unique about the labs and what attracted me to Stand Together Ventures Lab is its hands-on approach. STVL doesn't just provide funding, but they actively collaborate with the founders. They're offering them access to networks of resources, lots of strategic guidance, which is super critical, operational support, and then connections to a diverse group of thought leaders. So I find it a really great space where great ideas are cultivated into something that's into very scalable solutions that can drive systematic change. And then for me, being involved with Stand Together Ventures Lab is about aligning, like you said, with a mission-driven approach into business. It's about leveraging entrepreneurial spirit and innovation to create something that's real, sustainable impact in the world. And I'm passionate, obviously, about working with founders like that, but also building ventures that want to do well and also do good. And that's what Stand Together's Venture Lab is really enabling. It's turning visionary ideas into reality with a meaningful purpose behind them.
So you and I would be preaching to the choir answering this question because we both believe in it. But I'm curious what you would say to others that would say, why innovation? Why startups to solve these big challenges? Is the juice worth the squeeze with a startup, and can this scale and really drive change?
Yeah. So I that's a great question, and it's always it's something that I always want to challenge folks when they talk about, is it worth kind of is it kind of worth the squeeze? So founders and disruptive technologies are always kind of been at the forefront of addressing kind of all these huge challenges, because I think they're naturally positioned to think outside the box.
Yeah.
And they're inherently problem solvers, right? They see gaps and inefficiencies that others might accept as kind of the status quo, and then ask why not change it. And disruptive technologies provide the tools to break through all those old barriers and then create those new possibilities. So Is it worth the squeeze? So startups may not always have the same resources or reach as established corporations, but that's exactly, I think, what makes them so compelling, right? Startups, they're nimble, they can build to adapt quickly, they can pivot, experiment, without all the bureaucracy that often slows down some of the larger organizations. They can test all the new ideas, iterate really fast, and then take risks that bigger entities may not want to take risk, and they may want to shy away from that. And when they get it right, the impact can be really very, very profound, and they can disrupt entire tech industries and create ripple effects across that serve millions of people and touch millions of people's lives. That's actually where organizations like Venture Fuel come in, and why I love working with you guys so much in my past life, working at ARP Foundation. Because I think by partnering with larger corporations, startups gain access to that scale, to the market, and then the expertise they may not have on their own. So it becomes a win-win situation where innovation is accelerated, risks are going to be managed, and the potential for large-scale impact becomes a reality. So when people say it's not worth it or it may not worth the squeeze, I would argue that they're not seeing the full picture. Startups are the seeds of change, and with the right support and partnerships, they can grow into the mighty oak that reshapes entire landscapes. And that's the kind of transformative power we're talking about at Stand Together Ventures, at Stand Together Venture Labs. And I know that you feel similarly at Venture Fuel.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it so nicely, because one of the things is that acceptance of the status quo. It's like, well, that's just sort of the way it is, and we figured out how to get around it, and we're doing this thing. Whereas startups go, why is that thing that way? Can't we make that better? And they have the audacity in a lot of cases to make that leap and go tackle that thing that's hard and that others aren't paying attention to. And that's where you get that unlock, right? That growth. So, and I agree with you. There's a really beautiful combination of taking the resources and the risk mitigation of the large organization with that nimble, go get it, knock down the walls of a startup, and together there's some magic there. I also loved on the STVL, the website says, instead of asking what do you do, we ask entrepreneurs what needs to be done. And I think that is such an interesting twist on how to approach founders. And I would love to understand more. Why do you think founders in disruptive technologies are the solutions to these huge challenges? I know that you answered that a little bit, but I'm curious. That idea of what needs to be done is what I'm trying to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, so I really love that you picked that up. You picked that up from the Stand Together Venture Lab website, because I think that really captures the essence of not only what we're about, but I know a lot of the organizations that you work with are about. And you mentioned Blooming Health even earlier in our conversation that we worked with in the past. Because asking what needs to be done shifts the conversation from being about the entrepreneur to being about the problem that they're trying to solve, right? So it places the focus on impact rather than the credentials or the past accomplishments of that particular entrepreneur. So when you combine the visionary founder who's asking, what needs to be done with the groundbreaking technologies, you have the potential to challenge those established norms, to look at what might, in essence, become a scalable solution and tackle those systematic issues. So it isn't just, again, about innovating just for the sake of innovation, right? It's about leveraging entrepreneurship and tech just to make that real difference. And that's the kind of energy and mindset that's nurtured at Stand Together Ventures Lab. It's nurtured in the companies that we work with, like Blooming Health, for instance, in the past. And it's a mindset where you're not just asking, what can be done, but what can be done differently to be able to transform society in the future.
Yeah, I mean, reading the website before we did this, I love whoever the copywriter is just, I kept writing down notes. I was like, this is great. I mean, one I wrote down was, we invest to change society, better is possible. Which sounds like a Nike ad, right? Like it's like that inspirational line. But I believe that I see how much their mission aligns with your mission. Are you focused on any particular sector or area as you join the organization?
Yeah, so the sector that I'm very much focused on is healthcare. And how do we fix the healthcare system in the United States? One of the inherent problems that we have in healthcare is that, one, it costs a lot of money. And the second part is that people are generally unwell. We're generally unhealthy. Or the American society is generally unhealthy. So I'm really intrigued about that problem and how do we solve that. And then you have the secondary problem with healthcare where there isn't a supply and demand curve, right? So how do you create that supply and demand curve within the existing within the existing industry, and how do you then shift that so you make the set of patient that is actually a consumer and they're trying to consume and drive their own healthcare choices and their own healthcare outcomes at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We have a upcoming episode, hasn't been published yet, but it's with Mars Pet Care, and it was very interesting because I did the recording as I was researching for our conversation, and the areas of interest were very similar to healthcare, but it was for the pet, right? And it was preventative, it was listening, right, helping understand, doing diagnostics, getting in front of all this, and it's such an interesting space because technology is going so fast, and there's so many different ways to optimize. Uh, and it seems like healthcare is slow to get into that game, and or maybe just is a little bit behind, and maybe it's just because it's so big. There's so many things that need to be fixed there. What's your thought on healthcare, big picture? What why are so many challenges exist, and what the opportunity is?
Yeah. So again, I think the issue, there is no supply and demand in healthcare. That's not how that industry is currently big. It is huge. We're spending a ton, it's 25% of our GDP on healthcare.
Wow.
And it's largely driven by both government and by payers, right? By insurance companies that govern exactly how we navigate and use a particular system, and then providers to a certain extent down the line. The consumer is really kind of just the beneficiary of that particular system. It's one of the really kind of only industries I can think of where when you go in and get care, you don't actually know how much you're paying for it, like what you're paying for it, right? You find out later. Or you might know a little bit upfront, but you don't actually know the total cost of that. Very different than anything else, right? When we want to
Yeah.
buy something, we choose what we're buying and we know how much we're paying for it. And we make those particular choices based on the kind of outcome that we're trying to get to. Healthcare is just not like that. And so there's a lot of challenges around the system, and then makes it also difficult to be able to navigate the system, which a lot of folks are challenged with. How do you navigate our very complex healthcare systems? There's a lot of great companies that are addressing those issues. I'm working with a lot of fellows right now that are coming up with some incredible ideas, and are starting to validate those ideas and actually test those to see if there might be something meaningful that might be able to impact some of those particular areas. But it's a complex animal, right? And
Yeah.
we sometimes want to innovate around the edges. And I think what the challenge is to, hey, let's not worry about the edges. Let's actually tackle it head on and figure out exactly how we might be able to transform and reimagine the whole thing.
Can you talk as much as you were comfortable or able to share on how Stand Together Ventures Lab works with those fellows, and whether you can share any examples on the healthcare space or not? I'm curious. You mentioned fellows, right? You mentioned these big problems. How does that come together, and what is your role within that through line?
Yeah, so I'm a fellow actually, and what
Yeah.
fellows are entrepreneurs, kind of change makers that they recruit and identified in out in the U.S. that are really interested in solving this particular problem, um, and bring everyone together to figure out exactly where alignment is. And understand how Stand Together Ventures Labs might be able to provide the resources to be able to do that, right? So a lot of those resources are support within the ideation process, getting you in front of experts that are in that particular space, know the provider system really well, know the healthcare payer system super well, know what the patients are kind of struggling through and what those problem areas are, both for-profit and non-profit. It isn't necessarily just for-profit organizations that we talk with. And then you start iterating and ideating exactly how you might be able to solve that. It might end up becoming, for instance, an insurance product, right? One of the great things that Stand Together Venture Labs actually done in the past is from a policy perspective, promote ICRA. And, that's a kind of a new model of how to almost self-fund your own healthcare. And look at things like HSAs, for instance, and how do you make HSH and FSAs much more effective. But even going down to innovations that are very focused on women's health, for instance, and then the challenges that we face in our country across being able to make sure that we have all the right resources, kind of the right models to be able to support women's health. That's a huge issue. Concierge health is another one that I know STVL has funded in the past, and working with a few kind of functional care providers or concierge healthcare providers to kind of understand what their challenges are, how do they drive behavioral change, and then you just kind of iterate on those and try to figure out what concept might be able to work. After that particular process, you work in a validation phase. So traditional validation, where you make sure there is, in fact, the problem actually does exist in the scale that you say it exists, and that your key assumptions are correct, or if they're not correct, that you iterate very, very quickly and test other assumptions. And then the next phase of that is just the build phase, where you're building and launching that particular company and that particular solution to the marketplace. And so what STVL does is really kind of support you through that entire process, right? And my role in there is twofold. I build. That's what I love doing, is building new stuff and building new companies. Particularly with my background in tech, it helps me to be able to look at different disruptive innovations that we can potentially apply in tech. For instance, I'm working on a solution that is trying to figure out, using AI, how to navigate healthcare and at the same time negotiate your prices for you in real time. I think it's entirely possible to do that today, a year or so ago, maybe not so. And that's the kind of thing around disruptive technologies and the timing that we're trying to be able to align at Stand Together's Venture Lab.
Yeah, it's crazy interesting. Thanks for that. I think one thing, we've worked in the healthcare space a few times, and we did something around the patient caregiver journey. So thinking about how to support the actual patient and helping them get to doctor's appointments and get insurance and all those things. And we did sort of two versions of that were spread out by about 2 years. And to see the leap in technology and what was capable to solve some of those problems was so fascinating to see the whatever it is, the 48-month time frame. And it's like, things that we were like, well, this will never work because you could never get these things to connect. And now it's like, with the compute power and the things that are happening, disparate information, now some of these things are happening. So I think it's a really special time to be innovating in a space that has been difficult in the past. And I love that you're building, because that is definitely something that you're great at. And I'll use that to transition a little bit to the book. It grabbed me on LinkedIn. And I will say this because as a multi-time founder, there's a legitimate moment where you have to make that change from founder to CEO. And as I saw it, I was like, wow, this is something that every founder I've ever met should be thinking about. And it isn't really talked about a lot. They sort of read the crazy story of the founder getting bounced when the company goes public and those types of things. But the transition is real. There's this moment where it's like, hey, you're not in the garage anymore. Like, you're out leading a team of people. You're not doing the thing anymore. And so I thought it was such a great title. And I'm so interested. I haven't gotten a chance to read it, so I apologize for that. but would love if you could kind of introduce the book a little bit, what inspired you to write it, and then we can dig into some of the ideas behind it.
Yeah, no, and thanks for that observation. Making the transition from founder to CEO is, I think, one of the most challenging shifts any entrepreneur will face. And for me, the inspiration to write that book came actually from my own experiences, and then the countless conversations I've had with founders over the years. And I advise founders today, and a few healthcare companies, and really my own challenges as I think about where I am, and reflect on, hey, look, I'm kind of getting ready now to move from a creation mode into this CEO role, and am I ready for that? Right? It's always asking that question. What sometimes we don't ask is, when are you ready for that? What does your transition actually look like? And why are you the right person to be able to do this and to be able to lead the company? So when you start a company, you're driven by that passion, the innovation, the desire to be able to solve the specific problem. So you're in that full creator mode, just totally hands-on, doing whatever it takes to bring your vision to life. But at some point, if you want to scale and sustain that vision, you need to shift gears and move from just being that creator into becoming the leader, the CEO who can build that team, who can set the strategy, and obviously who can manage the growth of that organization. And I notice a lot of founders struggling with that transition. It's not easy to go from being that person who rolls up their sleeves to someone who empowers others to do exactly the same thing, right?
Right.
It requires a totally, completely different mindset and a different skill set. And the gap is what inspired me to write the book. And that's actually what the book is about. I wanted to provide practical roadmap to help founders navigate that leap, to help them understand not only the mechanics of being a CEO, but also more focused on the shift of the mindset required so that you lead with confidence and clarity. It's actually, the book is much more focused on that shift than looking at the mechanics of being a CEO. There's a lot of great books already about mechanics of being a CEO. So I believe that by making this transition thoughtfully, founders can retain that innovation, they retain that spirit, and while also building strong, sustainable companies. Then ultimately, that's how you turn something that's a great idea into a real legacy.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think one of the things that I was thinking about is there's this moment, if you're the founder, the creator, as you said, you do every job. You just find a way. Whatever is broken, you fix it. And that creates such a very interesting framework or foundation for when you hire people, because you've actually done the role that they're coming in to do. But that's also problematic. I would love to know what you think about this, or if this is part of the book at all. Is I've seen this moment where the founder's like, well, I did that, and this is how I did it. And how you did it might not be the best way. The people don't have all your background of the other 9,000 things you've done either that enabled you to do it so fast or so smart or so whatever. And so I always see this transition moment of like, well, why don't they just do it the way I did it, faster and better? Oh, I got to go back in and fix it myself, which of course keeps them from doing the things that scale. So do you have any, I mean, does that resonate? Is that one of the things that you've seen in sort of the research done for the book or your conversations?
Yeah, no, I actually experienced this firsthand, and experienced it firsthand in my first venture, that reached any kind of meaningful scale. And for those of you who worked with me in that venture, I want to publicly apologize now for how bad I was as a CEO. And what changes is kind of everything, right? When you're that founder, as you said, you're in the trenches, you're in the details. You wear all of the hats. You built it this way, and did that task this way, and then you're just kind of hoping that other people just do that and just automatically just do it better. Then you will do it, and that necessarily isn't true, right? And that's kind of the challenge, right? As your company grows, the role of the CEO kind of comes into play, and that job changes everything. You're doing yourself. And then focusing more on building and leading a team that can make your vision, and take your vision actually further than you could have ever done on your own. That is a shift in mindset where you're saying, hey, look, this is me. I built it this way. And now I need to bring other people that will actually take it to a totally different level, right? So that focus shifts from just the tactical execution to what the strategic oversight actually looks like. So you're not just pushing to make things happen, you're creating the conditions that make things happen through others. So you're setting that culture, you're aligning the vision, and then you're making sure everyone is moving in that right direction. And that change happens differently and at different times for every single founder. But it's obviously necessary when the company reaches a certain size, whether that is just a head count of 10 people, or maybe it's when you get to 100 people. It just depends on the complexity of the business, and what one person can manage moving forward. And it's that inflection point is when founders realize they need to evolve or kind of risk holding the company back. So yeah, that's what I've experienced firsthand myself.
Are there any pieces of advice that you could share from the book on that particular moment that could maybe help some of the founders out there listening that are in this moment of navigating? And by the way, I was smiling when you apologized, because like I've had moments in my previous startups and in Venture Fuel too, where it's, you're still the creator in the muck. Like it's fun to solve all the problems, and then you have this moment where you're like, wow, there's so many different challenges happening, there's no way I can solve all of them. And that sort of, for me, like I need to be hit in the head with that problem a bunch of times before I go, oh yeah, I can't do all these things. Now I have to figure out how to help other people do these things great. And it's not an easy or much talked about transition.
Yeah. So my first piece of advice, aside from apologizing when you do something really bad, is to kind of recognize that the transition isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of growth. Like, don't feel like you're losing something by stepping back from the day-to-day, from the day-to-day grind, right? For me, it's like, oh, crud, I'm not coding. I'm not contributing. And so you don't feel that you're losing that. Instead, see it as if you're gaining an opportunity to build something bigger than yourself. The second advice is to surround yourself with people who can complement your skills and then fill in the gaps. That could mean bringing in an experienced CEO to handle a lot of the operations, or finding a mentor like who's already made the same leap from founder to CEO and then help you guide you through that process. A lot of times I work with founders who have no mentor that can help them, guide them through that particular process. They have questions, they have challenges about what to do in an organization. They have no one to talk to. And sometimes it's very difficult just to talk to your board, because there's fiduciary responsibilities that come with being able to talk to your particular board. So the key is to realize that you don't have to have all the answers, right? And it's perfectly fine to ask for help. The third is just to focus on communication, right? As your role evolves, so does the way you communicate needs to be able to evolve. The communication with not just your team, your board, your customers, even the communication, the discussions you have with yourself are going to change. So focus on that communication. Like, be clear about your vision. Just be open to feedback. Make sure everyone is aligned. And that's how you build trust. That's how you empower your team, and then keep moving everyone focus in the same direction. And the very last one, and I know I say this in a lot of places I go and talk to, and specifically with the work we did at ARP Foundation and social isolation, just to remember to take care of yourself. Like, being a founder and in your journey to become CEO is really isolating, or can be really isolating and lonely. That transition can be emotionally taxing. So just make sure you take care of yourself. Don't forget your physical and mental health, and don't be shy again in asking for help.
Yeah, I love it. This is fantastic advice. I know this conversation has a lot of different legs to it, but we work with founders all the time, and it is really hard not to be the one coding. No matter what your business is, if it's coding or if it's consulting, right? Whatever it might be, doing the thing that got your business off the ground, that mindset shift is so difficult. And you're right, it is. I remember I asked for a promotion years ago at a different company. My boss at the time said, be careful. it's lonely at the top. And I was like, whatever, like you're just trying not to give me the raise, right? And I remember getting the raise and then realizing like, oh, all of a sudden those peers, like it's a different vibe, right? Because all of a sudden you're up here. And so if you're the founder, you're the CEO, you're surrounded by lots of people that are looking to you for guidance. But it's a hard place to get advice that is, clean and clear. So I agree with you. A mentor, a coach, something like that is so valuable. Paolo, where can people go to learn more about the work you're doing, to follow you, to get the book? Where would you like our listeners to go next?
Yeah. I have a website. It's my name. It's www.paolonarciso.com. The books, not just that book, but other books that I've written are in the website, and I write pretty often about the different things I'm working on. There's also links on that website to a GitHub, because all the stuff that I do from a research perspective, interviews that I do with folks on the ground, I just throw it up on GitHub, and hopefully other people can gain some insight from that. So please go to www.paolonarciso.com. There's links there to go into Amazon or the places that you like to buy your books, to buy the book. There's other books as well out there that if it's interesting to you on AI or on blockchain, the website will lead you to that particular area. And I'd love it for you all that want to and just have a conversation. Yeah, I love learning from everyone and getting feedback. And so, I would love to if people feel comfortable, just send me an email from the website, and happy to continue that conversation.
Well, we'll get everybody to go to the right place. And thank you for taking the time to chat again, and also for all the wonderful things you're doing to spark change